another Jew and Gentile podcast. I am your host, Chris Katulka, and with me is none other than the Jewish sage himself, the one, the only, Mr. Steve Herzig. How are you, sir?
Happy Passover to you, Chris.
Happy Pesach. Great to see you. Hag Sameach, as they say.
Hag Sameach. I've celebrated 2 different days.
Do you?
I did. Because I had grandkids who couldn't, the 2 families couldn't make it together, so I had to do it twice.
Okay.
And it cost me money. It cost me money, because when they look for the Afikomen, instead of 1 winner,
Aye.
I had 2 winners.
You're broke. You're broke.
And now I'm broke.
Maybe that's what Afikomen means in Greek. Broke. Welcome in, everybody. It's great to have you. Hey, listen, before you we even get started, number 1, go and rate this podcast. If you like this podcast and you're listening on Apple Podcasts, let people know that you like it.
Let us know.
Yeah, let us
they
know.
like it.
100%. Listen, if you want to do 1 star, then please don't do anything. Stay away. Feh. But if you like the podcast and you give it even a mediocre grade, we'll take a mediocre. Just write something nice. Give us the stars. We're not doing it just for our ego. We're doing it because when you actually promote the podcast and you review it, it actually moves it up the ranks. So if you believe that people should hear more about the Bible from a Jewish perspective, and they get to hang out with the Jewish sage himself, the one and only Mr. Steve Herzig, then please go and rate the podcast. Or
hey, we got nothing else to do but go up.
100 from 7 to 8. That's all we ask for.
That's right.
Maybe one day. But listen, also, if you're on YouTube and you're listening, go comment. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, everybody on YouTube. You can watch us live, or you can follow up as these are posted on YouTube. So we have a great show for you lined up. But actually, we're going to be focusing a lot around what's going on in Israel and also what's going on, Steve, on college campuses around this country.
Chris, seriously, we are living in strategic times. We are living in a time that I knew would happen. I knew it would happen. I taught the Holocaust at Emmaus Bible College for 25 years, and every year talked about, can this happen again? Yes, absolutely. Here's how it could happen. But anti-Semitism has always been in America, but it has never been revealed to the extent that it has. It is out in the open. It is rampant, and it is very much like it was. I tell people right now, anywhere between Germany 1929 and 1934, either a year after Adolf Hitler or a couple of years before, that's where we're living right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because not only do you have these young adults, because you could just go, oh, it's these progressive kids. They don't know what they're talking about. I mean, on Columbia University and maybe even NYU, the professors were standing around those students in solidarity with them. And I don't know what their thoughts are. Maybe it's just the freedom of speech or whatever the case might be. But they were guarding them and allowing them to promote their hate. And that's the problem. Hey, look, it's one thing. Honestly, if they want to support the Palestinian people, that's fine. It's when they call from the river to the sea, or it's when they call for the death of Jewish people, or they even harm Jewish students. This is what I always tell people, is that people, there's a lot of, in the scholarly world, there's this idea of anti-Zionism, which is the hatred of the state of Israel, and anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of the Jewish people. And what's amazing is a lot of people go, oh, I can separate those two. You know, the Ilhan Omars of the world and the Rashida Tlaibs of the world, who are in our political sphere here in the United States, they can sit there and say, oh, I'm allowed to hate Israel. I'm not anti-Semitic, though. I love Jewish people, but I hate Israel. And the problem is whenever you say I can separate the two, what inevitably happens is anti-Semitism goes on the rise. We hate Israel. Anti-Semitism goes up. We hate Israel. Anti-Semitism goes up. So they play with each. They play off of each other. Anti-Semitism leads to the hatred of Israel. The hatred of Israel leads to anti-Semitism, and that's what we're seeing on college campuses. Jewish students can't even make it to class. They're making them stay at home because of the violence.
Chris, if it's anti-Israel, as they say, then why are they targeting people with yarmulkes or women who are modestly dressed and appear as observant Jewish women? That's hey, if you don't believe Israel's legitimate, you could say that. But the problem is, oh, look, there's somebody with the yarmulke, and they go after them, and they intimidate them, almost and sometimes physically, yelling and screaming and aligning them with pigs and death to the Jews. And they're only singling them out when they see an outward display. Thus, whether you're in this country or in France, they are actually telling people. The head rabbi, he's not the head rabbi, but the rabbi at Columbia,
Hillel rabbi,
told the Jewish students, don't come back.
100%.
Not because he was being mean. It's too dangerous to them.
Yeah.
And you're crunching on your microphone.
I'm sorry.
Whoa, look at this guy. Where did he get his etiquette? Ay, ay, ay.
I should silence this thing. I'm starving.
Chris,
I'm starving.
I got crunches in my ears here. He's eating almonds.
I'm starving, okay?
I don't mind but our
inter-
listeners give them a break.
I do the intermittent fasting, and my fast broke. And I've got to eat something.
That is fine, Zygazun, but don't crunch. So, folks, you already know who you are.
Hey.
He's got hold it up, Chris.
Here we go. I got some almonds.
He's got almonds, low, no carbs, high in protein,
100%.
very healthy, Zygazun, and he puts it in his mouth.
I got a notch.
And he's kissing the microphone, and I got crunch. This isn't Lucky Charms.
People are listening to this going, where are these guys are bipolar. I mean, one minute they're talking about Israel, the next minute they're talking
about people who are saying death to the Jews, and I got bombs going off in my earphones.
This is totally off topic, Steve, but I have to tell you this story, okay? Yesterday, I was picking up my mom, and I got a phone call from a friend in Dallas who's a family friend on my wife's side of the family. So nice. She was very helpful in linking me and connecting me with my wife, okay? So she calls me. She will go nameless. And she goes, Chris, I want to tell you something that I've done. And I go, okay. She said, I'm planning my funeral.
Oy, oy, oy.
I said, well, is everything okay? And she goes, oh, I'm fine. But I'm planning my funeral. And I want you to know something. I told Pastor Neil. So Pastor Neil.
A shout out to Pastor Neil.
I told Pastor Neil there's 2 people speaking at my funeral and 2 people only. Chris Katulka and then I think maybe her son, Greg. And so,
Pastor Neil must have felt pretty bad.
Well, apparently Pastor Neil was going, well,
what am I, chopped liver?
I don't know if he cared. She didn't seem to think that he cared too much about that, but I think he was more going, so wait, do we need to prepare for this? What's going on? And she goes, no, just here's the deal. Chris is speak. So yesterday, as I'm getting everybody together in the family, I get this phone call letting me know that there will be a day coming, and I don't know when. There's no plan for it, but I will be speaking at a funeral. Did you ever have that before?
I did have a guy in Chicago who ultimately I did his funeral, but his son, I think I told you, his son passed away, and he called me. I was his third choice.
Your third choice, yeah.
Just so you know, you're not my first or second. They couldn't do it, so I'll take you.
I just thought that I said to her, I go, oh my God, I don't know if I should be. I don't know what
you
to
should
think.
Be honored. I'm honored. That is an honor. But at least when you do it, don't eat almonds.
Right in the mic.
Don't crunch in the mic.
Oh, okay. So listen, before we get started and talk more about what's going on in Israel, Steve, I've been reading this book that I want to chat about really quick because it's been very fascinating. I've heard about this book a while ago. I've engaged with it a little bit, but I finally have had a moment early in the morning to go through it. And the book is called The Bodies of God and the World of Ancient Israel. And it's by a very prominent Jewish scholar. He's not a believer,
Christian.
not
That's
a Christian.
Important to tell the folks.
That's right. His name's Benjamin Sommer, and he is a prominent scholar. I'll just, so that you know, he is a professor in the Department of Bible and Ancient Semitic Languages at Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And I think he even might have moved to a different one. But he's no joke, okay? So he does this award-winning book, actually, on the bodies of God. And what's fascinating...
Stop right there. Jewish. Scholar knows the Midrash, the Talmud, the whole thing.
And I also very traditional. I don't know. I wouldn't call him reformed. I think he might even be maybe conservative. I don't want to label him. I don't think he'd like that. But
the title of the book seems almost the moment you say the title again.
The Bodies of God and the World.
The Bodies of God.
That right there
is already, there'd be some Jewish people who say, what are you talking about?
That right there, he argues. He says the moment that they hear that God can take a bodily form in some way is enough to make most Jewish people say, "Feh, I'm done."
Exactly.
And so he is actually. It's funny because as a Christian reading this, I'm enjoying.
You're saying, "Hey, what's he got to say?"
Well, yeah,
come over to our side.
I know. I'm thinking, let's talk about this. But it's funny. His goal is to keep the Jewish audience. Hey, don't leave yet. I want to show you from the scriptures. I want to show you from actually what's called ANE, ancient Near Eastern. Basically environment, if you will. So looking at the Hittites, looking at the Canaanites, looking at the neighbors of Israel and how they worshiped, so he's doing a lot of research on this idea of the bodies of God. And it's very fascinating because, he uses texts that we would all call Christophanies. When the three men appeared to Abraham, all of a sudden God takes on the form of a man. Now, what's fascinating in this study is that he holds to a theory that I think our audience should know about. It's called the JEDP theory. It's called redaction criticism, where you're studying, a lot of people have studied over the years how the Old Testament was put together. Now, Steve and I are very conservative. When Moses wrote the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, we believe Moses wrote it.
100%.
We believe Daniel wrote Daniel.
Yep.
Ezekiel wrote
in Aramaic and Hebrew.
100%. And there are higher critics of the Bible who look at it and they go, I want to challenge some of those more traditional thoughts, conservative thoughts. And so many, many years ago, there was a theory came out called JEDP, which is basically Jehovah, Elohim, priestly, and Deuteronomy.
And by the way, this is old. We're talking 100 years.
Yeah, 100 years. This isn't something developed yesterday, but it's kind of an interesting way of understanding how people read the Bible. So for instance, they'll say Genesis chapter 1 was written by a priestly group of people because it highlights the 6 days of God working, and on the seventh day he rests. So the priest would have been encouraging people to work for 6 days and rest on the seventh. And so that must have been written by a priestly group of people that probably existed around the time of Josiah
and
or further on.
And they're multiple writers rather than one Moses.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden you get to a chapter 2 of Genesis and you have a completely different approach to the creation account, which that's the way they would write it, that now all of a sudden we have Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and there's that development that takes place. And I believe they say that was written by Elohim. And so you'll notice that it's instead of it being Yahweh that's written, it's Elohim that's written. So they try to say that was a different writer. And then what happened is when they put the Old Testament together, they mashed them all up. And that's how we ended up with the canon of the Old Testament. And it's very fascinating the way that they write. But that theory is that he's arguing in this book, he's arguing that some of the earliest writings have God in the ability of being able to take on a bodily form. There he is walking in the Garden of Eden. There he is appearing to Moses in a man.
While
there he is,
still not leaving heaven.
While still not the fluidity of God, they would say.
That's right. And that is from a traditional Jewish point of view, that is blowing some people away. That is an anathema.
You could almost say, it's one of the.
It is anathema. Yeah, it's cursed. You can't do that. But he's not saying it's Jesus.
No.
This is not Christian. But what is fascinating, and you've told me about this in your reading, that he's actually opening the door to people like us.
100%.
And so that's an interesting conversation.
In the back of the book, he does mention or somewhere that this is going to be a challenge for, it will, this comes from the Review of Biblical Literature, a man named Gilbert Lozano, who says Summer's sensible treatment of the biblical texts and the traditions that they generated will be welcomed by Jews and Christians interested in examining the common roots of their distinct faith. So ultimately saying it will open up a conversation among Jews and Christians. And so what ends up happening is he does all this great development of understanding who God is, the personhood of God, how God came down. And what we've talked about this when we did our study on the tabernacle. In Exodus chapter 40, God's physical presence, called the kavod, comes down, the glory. In the Hebrew, it's translated glory, but in Hebrew, it's kavod. And the kavod comes down into the Holy of Holies, and it rests. That's where you get the word Shekinah. And so the Shekinah, the kavod, which we've argued before, and which Benjamin Summer talks about, is he says the kavod, actually, it means heaviness, but it means almost like substance. It's the substance of God. It's not this ethereal concept of God in the heavens. All of a sudden, God comes down into his Holy of Holies, and his presence is there. And I believe what he's going to be arguing in the book, as it kind of wraps up, is that there is an understanding of kavod is not just the substance of God. Steve, it's actually a body of God. He argues that there are scholars that say, because we are made in the image of God. I find this very fascinating. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, he says, let us make man in our image. That means that you and I, he's arguing, you and I look like what God would look like. When it talks about an image, it's almost like a print of who God is. So all of a sudden, all of these, when God smells the sacrifices through his nostrils, or his arm is protecting Israel, or he's walking through the garden, these anthropomorphisms are actually really the way that we should understand God, because he's not just this ethereal being. When he came down in the cloud, he was sitting on his throne, and it actually is it should be seen as a body of God, which is very fascinating.
Chris, if we could go back 2,000 years, what you're talking about is John, the apostle, who wrote the Gospel of John, is having a conversation with the Stoics. The people who held to this force, not Star Wars kind of force, but kind of the same. And when John wrote the first chapter in the Gospel, he talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then you drop down to verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So this debate, actually, when you started to talk to me about this book, and this involves the show notes, Chris,
100%.
As a bonus to our listeners, all 7 of you, I'm going to make available on the show notes a message that I've given, actually, it's called the Memra. The Memra is Aramaic, and it was the italicized word added whenever God was taking an action, creation, saving, reconciling. They would, in our Bibles, Chris, we italicize the translators for the translation so that we understand the text better. They would insert this word, memra, whose counterpoint is logos, the word. And so what you're talking about, and what the professor is talking about, is something that Christians have debated with sophisticated pagans back during the time when John wrote his gospel. So it's intriguing.
It is.
And it helps us in our conversations. We're about to meet with a rabbi sometime in the future.
He might even be on the podcast next week.
Yeah, hopefully he will be. At least we're going to talk to him about it. But I'm anxious to be able to present some of this info to him and see how he responds.
The thing that's interesting about the, Benjamin Summers' analysis here is that he argues for the tension in the Bible between the idea of God coming down into the Holy of Holies, as if God leaves heaven and comes down, so his presence is fully in the Holy of Holies. And then you have other texts like Deuteronomy, he argues, where it almost seems like God never came down. His presence always stayed in heaven, but his word is what was in the Ark of the Covenant, and his memra is what was guiding them. And what I love about Jesus is that, he highlights that tension. So did God leave heaven, or is God everywhere? What's going on? Jesus fulfills, he is the Word who did become flesh. He did all of it. But I want you to hear this, because this comes from rabbinical writing. This isn't Christian writing. This doesn't come from the New Testament. This professor is highlighting some of the interesting components that would give great argument within Jewish texts for a Trinity, for the understanding of the divinity of God, the Godhead being more than just one, but understanding it as one God, but three distinct persons. And I want you to hear this text that he writes. He says, other rabbinic texts that discuss the Shekinah, however, suggest something resembling the multiplicity of divine embodiment, which means that...
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. It's the idea that you could have divine embodiment from one God in multiple places. Okay? He says, some seem to regard the Shekinah, that was the presence that came down into the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle. Some suggest resemble the some seem to regard the Shekinah as present in a specific earthly location and in heaven at one and the same time. That's amazing to think about. So God's in heaven and God's on earth, the Shekinah in one. But then he goes on to say this, Steve. This one really got me good. He gives an example from a midrash where he says this: elsewhere in the idea of Shekinah reflects the ancient notion of the fragmentation of divine selfhood. That means, again, the idea of dividing a little bit here. Several scholars note the importance of the passage in the late rabbinic text, Midrash Mishal, to Proverbs 22:29, in which, watch this, the Shekinah, which is God's physical presence, his kavod, the Shekinah stands before God and pleads successfully on behalf of King Solomon, who would otherwise have denied a share in the world to come. And so here's the idea, is that, you have God
pleading to God.
Pleading to God. The Shekinah pleading to God.
Welcome to our world. Welcome to our world. Chris, I told you about Passover. I had 2 straight days when one family couldn't make it and one family could make it. And we did a Passover here on the podcast, and I'm bringing it up because of the bag that we had with the 3 matzahs. And I'm explaining to, there's 4 total that live nearby. The oldest is 13, and the youngest is 6. So there were 2, and then there were 2. So I got out my bag, told them there's 3 matzahs in the bag, and we always take the middle matzah, just as we did here on the podcast. And I'm explaining to youngsters, hey, we're united. This is the Jewish people, the priests, the high priests, and the people of the land, and we're united together. But look at it. I said, do we know the 3 persons in the Godhead? I'm asking 2 and 2. And so I'm helping them, and yes, okay, name them. Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's right. 1 God, 3 persons. And what are we doing? We're taking the middle matzah. We're breaking it, and I'm going to hide it. It cost me big bucks, but we're going to hide it. And you're going to look for it. And when you find it, we're all going to eat it around the table. And it means he came. So to what you're telling us, and we believe it, Jesus, God, died on the cross, and God is still in heaven, and God is still a spirit all over the universe, wherever he wants to be. And yet Jesus, the second person, is in place and time.
Yep.
In place and time. And all being the same God, one God. This is what blows my people away. This is hard for us.
And that's why I love this book too, because see, you and I honestly, it's talking to me. I come going, amen, brother.
Yeah, welcome to our world.
Amen, brother. And then, but the problem is that I like reading this because it highlights, no, in the Old Testament, there was a cause for and we knew this already, but a cause for understanding that there is, the words that he used are very technical, but fragmentation among the Godhead.
That's an conservative Christians would have a hard time with fragmentation.
100%. It's not that it's separating the oneness of God, or it's not dividing the oneness of God. It's showing that God can have locations. His personhood can have various locations that are the Spirit working now in our lives. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity.
In heaven. Seated next to the Father.
That's right. The Shekinah talking to the God. All of these things are evident, not just, and this was the big thing I wanted to point out today, is that it doesn't come from even the Bible. It comes from rabbinic thought in the Talmudic period.
They're actually interfacing with the text and trying to interpret it, which is what we respect. We respect that kind of thinking. And obviously, we hope eventually the Spirit of God would lead them to solving that issue pretty simply through the person of Christ. But by the way, what you're reading helps us to understand why the Spirit of God wanted a book to the Hebrews.
Yes.
That coincides perfectly. He's our great high priest. So he's God pleading for his people, to God,
100%.
Which is exactly what they're saying.
Well, and it's showing that God is the only one who could do the business of solving the issue of sin once and for all by sending his own son, who is a part of the Godhead. So again, it's not that we're saying it when I use that word fragmentation, I'm not saying I agree with that exact term, but I'm showing the Jewish thought. And when you really study what was going on in that time and you really study the text, you can't run from it. God did appear to Abraham in bodily form,
God, without leaving heaven,
without leaving the controls. In fact, one of the Talmudic texts, I love it, where it talks about when the Shekinah is coming down into the tabernacle in Exodus 40. It says that the angels were worried that God would leave them in heaven to come to earth, and they had to be consoled. No,
don't worry.
That's right.
I'll never leave you. Don't worry.
My presence will be with you in heaven, and it will also be with my people on earth.
You know what? Just listening to that, wouldn't that give the angels a sense of he's bigger than even what we thought?
100%.
He's bigger. And no matter how big in your mind and how grateful you are for his infinite everything, he's bigger than that.
Yes.
He's bigger than what you can ever comprehend, even the angels. I think this is exciting. Welcome to our world.
Well, I've not gotten there yet. So in the next few, and I'll get back to you, Steve, and we'll talk about it again. But he will, as he's talking in this segment on post-biblical writing, which is the Talmud, he's Jewish, so he calls the New Testament post-biblical writing.
Right.
For us, it's biblical writing. But he will talk about the fluidity of God in Christianity. So I'll come back prepared with some of his thoughts on that.
I'm glad you're bringing this up to our 7 listeners because it's important that we should not be afraid of scholarship, of other people's view. We hold on to what we know to be the truth, but let's not poo-poo people. Let's take the knowledge that they have and listen to what they're saying and be able to talk through it. This is major kinds of stuff. We're on the same page, yet we're not even in the same book.
100%.
At the same time.
That's great. Well, I think you'll like this too, Steve, because he highlights in this segment the memra.
I love it.
He talks about the fact that in the Targums, the Targum is an Aramaic interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. And it says, in Targum Onkelos, God walks before Israel in verse 3 and verse 8 in Deuteronomy 31, verses 3 through 8, whereas God's word, the Memra, walks before them in verse 6 and supports them in verse 8. The situation in Targum Pseudo-Jonathan to these verses is more complex. God's Shekinah leads Israel in verse 6, and the Shekinah of God's word, the Memra, leads them in verse 8. So again, the idea of word, that, Jesus, the word became flesh. It's the idea, the 10 Commandments, the law was the word. It was guiding the people, and it's true. but so is his Shekinah, the presence of God. So,
amazing. Well, I'm going to include in the show notes. How do they get to the show notes, Chris?
Well, they're going to just scroll right on down. And you know what? When you scroll right on down and you see Steve's free notes from his Memra presentation, I hope that you gravitate to them. Also, gravitate to the link for our sponsor, which is FOI Equip. And FOI Equip is where not only you can follow up with Steve's last class that he's doing tonight on Romans 9 through 11, as God rejected his people, may it never be. He's going to be teaching the last class on that, and that's Romans chapter 11, I'm assuming, right?
That's correct. And Romans chapter 10 has a bonus, my bar mitzvah pictures.
I love it. Hey, why should you come tonight? You're going to see...
They could see Yogi Berra for chapter 9, Steve Herzig's bar mitzvah pictures for chapter 10, and chapter 11 is Zvi Kalisher.
All right, there you go. There's reason enough to come, foiequip.org. And then next month, I got to get myself...
Now we're bringing a scholar. We're leaving the elementary things behind, and we are marching forward to Mike Stoller.
That's right.
Dr. Mike Stoller.
Maybe he'll show pictures of his childhood, too.
He'll probably show a video of the Alabama football team.
I was going to say, it's got to be Nick Saban or something like that. So anyway, Dr. Mike Stollard, our director of international...
past rocket science.
And past rocket scientist. That's right. He is the executive vice president of... the vice president of international ministries here at Friends of Israel.
Don't give him a raise here. He's the vice president of international ministries.
My brain was all over the place. But he's going to be teaching a class on the facts and flaws of covenant theology. Bum. And so anyway, you can go to foiequip.org and there you can sign up.
Chris, if anybody wants to text us, how do they do that?
Text us at 424-444-1948. I get great texts from people all the time. I like to respond as fast as I can. And people, I always say send questions. Nobody has questions. They just want to talk to us, which I love too.
I misplaced my mug on a mug, Chris, but we still have, I understand we actually still have some mugs left. If somebody wants a mug on a mug, that is the Jew and the Gentile mug, which I can't even hold up in front of the camera, but what do they do to do that?
Well, they're going to go to gofoi.org/mug, and there, when they give $10 to FOI Equip, they're going to get a mug. And the mug on a mug is a picture of our faces on a coffee mug.
Oh, don't tell them what that is. Now they won't get it.
But it's a minimum donation of $10. And we hope that you maybe...
shipping is free.
I don't even know how we're making...
I don't know.
Any donations from this.
This is no fundraiser. We ended up paying... We're paying people to take our money.
That's right. We're begging you to listen. Go to gofoi.org/mug. Steve, I was flipping through X, which is formerly Twitter, and I came across Morning Joe.
Morning Joe on MSNBC.
That's right. And so, what's his last name again? Joe Scarborough. And I've always wanted to look like Joe Scarborough.
He's got great hair.
He's got great hair. You know, he's got a great look. In fact, I always like to say one of our colleagues in Australia, he kind of looks like Joe Scarborough a little bit. I call him the Joe Scarborough of Australia. But he was on his show, Morning Joe, and he was...
Not our rep. He wasn't on the show.
No, not him. Morning Joe was on Morning Joe.
You're from the time you started with the almonds, things have gotten downhill.
That's right. I'm starving. That's why. But Morning Joe went on, Joe Scarborough went on to talk about what's going on college campuses and the difficulty Israel's having.
And he had a guest on who was really good.
Yeah, he's talking about the absurd, which I love this. Morning Joe Scarborough is talking about the absurdity that Israel is having a hard time fighting a war in the PR world, that they're constantly being told, don't do this, don't do that. And he gives great examples here. That's the setup I want you to hear. But ultimately, his conclusion is where we're going to go with this, because his conclusion is a proper conclusion. So here is Joe Scarborough.
Let her rip, Joe.
One of my pet peeves seems to be one of your pet peeves, and that is, 2 million people have been killed in the Sudan civil war. I haven't seen a protest in NYU for that. Assad killed 500 Arabs. I didn't see colleges burned down. 500,000 Arabs killed by Assad. Saddam Hussein killed over 1 million Muslims in wars. I gassed them. I didn't see protests there. And yet your school is shut down right now because Israel is responding to the worst attack against Jews worldwide since the Holocaust. Help us sort through that.
And we can debate that response.
Again, I don't know algebra,
Mika.
but
Yeah,
I'm
Mika.
pretty good at the common denominators here, and why there's no common denominators in all of these. It's just that it's Jews defending their homeland. Because if you look at the numbers,
that's what I want us to focus on, because we'll hear from his guest in a moment. But I love that he used, because I've used this phrase before. You have too. It's the common denominator. What is the common denominator between all these things happening on college campuses, happening in Israel, happening with media, all of these things? What is the common denominator when Israel is trying to fight a war against a proxy of Iran in Gaza? This is going to be the common denominator, which is they're Jews. And I think that's something to just highlight as he moves on here.
even with American wars, they don't add up.
Well, first off, good to be with you, and I especially appreciate your leadership on this issue. I'll give you some more numbers. 2,200 American servicemen killed at Pearl Harbor. We go on to kill 3.5 million Japanese, including 100,000 in one night. 2,800 Americans in 9/11. We go on to kill 400,000 people in Afghanistan and Iraq. We weren't accused of genocide. You had, if Mexico had elected a jihadist cartel to run their country, and then they incurred into Texas, and on a per capita basis killed 35,000 people, or the population of the University of Texas, and on the way back took the freshman class at SMU hostage and hid them under tunnels, what would we do? It'd be the great Sonora radioactive parking lot. But Jews are not allowed, and Israel is not allowed to prosecute a war. And they are prosecuting a war more humanely than we have done. The ratio of combatants to civilians is, of civilian death to combatant mortality is lower than it was in Mosul, lower than it was in Japan, lower than it was in Germany. So there's just a different standard for Jews in Israel when it comes to prosecuting a war. They're allowed to fight back to a truce. But unlike America or any other Western nation that is attacked this viciously, they're not allowed to win a war. It's a double standard.
That's a key word.
It's
standard.
It's a double standard. That was Scott Galloway, who is a business a professor in the NYU Business School there, talking about the statistics. And it's true. You know, I love that Joe Scarborough did bring up when were those protests being done on college campus when it came to the Syrian civil war, and there were hundreds of thousands of Syrians that were killed, or the Sudanese wars, or all of these things that were where there was a physical genocide. Nobody said a thing. Quiet, bupkis. And now all of a sudden Israel does a very precise war as much as possible with the desire to preserve human life. And what happens? The media machine. The schools, these Ivy League schools, are all becoming what is it called? Hotbeds of anti-Semitism. And so, how does this happen? It's a double standard, and the double standard is it's Jews, it's Jewish people.
Chris, you go to the Book of Esther. We've talked about it several times on this podcast. Haman convinces the king that there's a certain people. Mm-hmm. And I liken that verse to people in general. Whenever we say those people, in this case, it's those people are always the Jews. Those people. Who are those people? Well, they're not us. They're not us. Mm-hmm. And Jews have always been the other. We've always been the other. And the reason that's significant, and it as it relates to Jews, the difference between the Somalis and the Japanese and the Germans in those other wars is they weren't Jewish. And yes, Satan is always after anybody, but Satan targets Jews. Mm-hmm. And there's this mesmerizing thing that falls upon us because it's satanic. Almost any person who studied the Holocaust will know that Adolf Hitler dealt in the occult. Mm-hmm. And when I mean dealt with it, he was immersed in it. And there are testimonies of Hitler being his persona was different in the public than it was privately. And when you look at some of these protesters, first of all, they're not letting you see themselves. Mm-hmm. They're hiding. They're making sure you can't identify them. and they are screaming.
It's not COVID. It's not COVID.
No, it's not. But they are wearing COVID.
They wear masks. That's right.
Their voice curdles. I've seen some of the hate, the vitriol is satanic. So now, if you don't believe in that aspect, people who are commenting say there is this curdle, this yelling, this it doesn't make any sense in the context. How could they have this much venom when a Jewish student walks by? I think our opinion here at Friends of Israel, we believe the undercurrent is satanic, just like it was in the book of Esther.
100%. It was encouraging for me to hear this come from Joe Scarborough because, of course, the network that he's on definitely leans left. I'd even argue.
You heard Mika saying, "Well, we could debate how it's handled."
She was rolling her eyes a little bit in the video, but when you think about the fact that MSNBC, I would say, leans left even into the progressive realm.
Yep.
And there is a genuine concern among Jewish people, I believe, about, this shouldn't be a political issue, but it's becoming one.
No question.
It's becoming an issue for President Biden. It's becoming in his party. And
he hasn't said one word about it. That shows you how he hasn't, because it doesn't play for. It's an election year. It doesn't play for him politically. He's going to lose votes over this. He's better off from a political point of view to say nothing. From a presidential point of view, he should be leading the way. And instead, we got the head of Congress who goes to Columbia.
100%. And, but the point, though, that is important to see is that there are even Jewish people now. There was a gentleman who is in the tech industry, and I forget what particular business he runs, but he was doing a big one. He was doing a panel discussion, and he was saying, I'm Democrat. I voted for Joe Biden, and he's going on and on. He goes, but I'll tell you this right now, if Democrats don't fix this problem that they have with Jewish people, I'll vote for a Republican. He didn't just say, I'm not voting. He's saying, I'm going to go with the other side where I know these people stand for Israel and the Jewish people. They stand for everybody, but they stand for Israel and the Jewish people. They don't do the double standard nonsense.
Unfortunately, as I said, this is political. The state of Michigan, supposedly, those who take polls know that Michigan could go either way, and there's about 400,000 Muslims in Michigan, and they hold to a certain view as to what's happening between Hamas and Israel. And I think there's somewhere between 150 to 200,000 Jewish people in the state of Michigan. And so just do the numbers from a political point of view. You want to win the state. And it's unfortunate. And I think it's just a commentary on just the state of the union as far as winning an election versus protecting people.
Well, they're saying that Biden had his kind of Trump moment where Trump was highlighting in the past with the Charlottesville situation, there's good people on both sides. And
he already had, yep.
Yeah, and people interpreted that as meaning that there's good people in the KKK, and that's not what he was saying. But at the same time, Joe Biden said, I'm running for president because of what Trump did with Charlottesville. I'm running for president, and now when it comes time to choosing a side between Israel and the Palestinians, he goes, "Oh, there's good people in Israel, and there's good people in the Palestinian world."
When the bill passed for the $17 billion that's going to the United States, it was a bigger bill, but some's going to Ukraine and other things. He said, "Yes, we're supporting Israel, but yes, the Palestinians have a good cause as well."
Yes.
So he's playing the same game.
He's playing the same game, and because he's trying, like you said, it's election season. But I think people want to see him come down on the side of truth.
I agree 100%.
When you look at John Fetterman, see, we'll just keep it in the same party.
New hero.
Yeah, you're a senator.
He's my senator. I confess I didn't vote for him. I wasn't interested in him. I thought one thing, and I was wrong. I don't mind saying I was wrong. He's got a flag of Israel in his office. He is pro-Israel. Not because just to be pro-Israel. He has evaluated the situation. He knows who was attacked, and he's going with truth.
100. That's the thing, is that also he's identifying, I believe, who he is as an individual and saying, I stand with the ideals. I stand with the values of Israel and the Jewish people. And I think he's cutting through all of the political correctness and getting right to the heart of it. I mean, he's more vocal about Israel and supporting it than some Jewish politicians like Bernie Sanders and
unashamed.
whatnot.
Yes. Look, that's the kind of leadership you want. I don't know if you want to comment at all on Johnson going to Colombia. Did you have a video on that, or we don't?
I don't have a video on it, but I was glad that he was able to voice his opinion, which is exactly what Joe Scarborough was doing, just on the other side of the aisle. You had mentioned earlier, too, that this was an opportunity for the president to show up, or somebody in the presidential, the vice president, somebody to say something about the fact that Jewish kids need to be able to go to school and feel safe on college campus. And instead, it took the Speaker of the House to go and to stand with the Jewish people. And I know that he is an ardent supporter of Israel and the Jewish people, especially, I've heard him say this, from a biblical perspective. And so, which I love. But anyway, I'm glad that he went.
Hey, Chris, how would you like to be a parent? Not forget Jewish or Gentile. You're a parent. You're so proud. Your college-age child has gone to Columbia, a prestigious Ivy League school. $90,000 a year. $90,000. And good news, they can study from home. Yeah. Don't come back. Don't be on campus. It's actually too dangerous. Just in the protection of your own home, tune in on a Zoom.
100%. Yep.
Hey, Equip offers you Zoom classes.
Yeah. Hey, maybe we
charge nothing.
Maybe we should start charging $90,000 a year.
Nothing. Bupkis, just come on, and we have multiple courses.
That's right. Exactly. No, that's a great point, Steve.
Taught by scholars. Some of it, not me. Mike Stollard is a PhD.
He's a PhD. That's like going to class.
Going to class for
us,
free.
It's like,
but in Columbia, give me your $90,000 and you could Zoom.
When you go to class with us, it's like Sesame Street. When you go to class with Mike, it's like going to engineering school.
That's right.
So it's very interesting what's going on college campuses, Steve, like Columbia. You're hearing things. The Jerusalem Post reported this. Burn Tel Aviv to the ground, and Jewish students were told by anti-Israel protesters to go back to Europe. That is the most anti-Semitic statement you could possibly say. Maybe you want to unpack that a little bit.
Well, just the headline: "Burn Tel Aviv to the ground." Thank God there is an Israel, Chris. Mm-hmm. Thank God there is an Israel. And this kind of this is coming from the United States. This used to be in Arabic in past decades. Calling for this, it's now in the United States. It is an indicator of what we at Friends of Israel have been talking about for a long time. Only time that Jewish people historically have gone back to the land since the diaspora of 70 AD. The biggest aliyahs, returns, have been because of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And the primary place where the most Jewish people live outside of Israel is North America and France.
Yep.
That's where the biggest, there's other pockets. Those are the biggest pockets. And what is happening in France in the last 20 years is that those with resources have been buying property, French, Jewish people, in case they have to get out, because this is not new for Europe. These kind of headlines, they are new to the United States. Chris, there will be a day, we've talked about it a million times, when Jewish people will look around in America and say, I can't live here anymore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we know that has to happen because we believe the Bible to be true, and all the nations of the world will gather against them.
Well, and it was also thought among Jewish people, what's happening in Europe could never happen here in the United States.
Exactly.
And what we're seeing is, and a lot of this, again, I agree with you, Steve, it is satanic. It is incredibly satanic. And it all seems to be brewing in two places. Number one is college campuses, and number two is social media. And I'm glad to see recently, I know that a lot of people don't like the bill that was passed supporting Ukraine and Israel to the tune of several $billions, but also embedded in that was forcing TikTok to sell itself.
Yeah, they have 270 days.
They have 270 days to sell, and if they're in an agreement to sell at that point, then they have an additional 3 months to sign the contract. But they have to sell this.
They're spying on us, Chris. They're spying on us.
And this is where kids are learning about hating Israel. It's built into the algorithm. I think they've done statistical analysis on it. And what they found out is that for every 2 pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, whatever you want to call it, videos that come through, only one, more pro-Israel one comes through. The algorithm is built that way so that kids are seeing this stuff and being inundated with lies. And so,
how is all this happening? Chris, I watch those people. They're all wrapped up. Their faces are wrapped up. And you wonder, I used to wonder, do they have a job?
Yeah.
Do these
No.
Do these people, how are they living? Where'd they go?
All right, don't get me started.
I gotta
Don't get
tell
me
you,
started.
do you know that while this is going on, they've had reports. They are drinking lattes. They are ordering lattes. They are
That's $7.
They are bringing in DoorDash and their food. You know how they're funded? They're funded by this man. This is a headline out of jns.org. The headline is Soros funneled $15 million to groups behind pro-Hamas protests. Now, this saddens me. It grieves me because Soros is Jewish.
Yeah, Holocaust survivor.
He's Jewish, and he actually gives the money to what's called the Open Society Foundation. And so he funneled $13.7 million of the money through the Tide Center, a left-wing advocacy group. So, Chris, you wonder if these people can get a job? That is their job.
Yeah, they're getting paid to do that. Well, a lot of people were looking and seeing on the various college campuses like NYU, like Yale, like Columbia. They're looking and they're going, these people all have tents. And we're not talking about tents to live, like official places to sign up for events and things like that. Where is this money coming from to maintain this infrastructure, this social media presence, this communications platform? How are they doing this? Well, all that funding is coming through these programs that Soros and others. It's not, we don't want to just make it seem like Soros, but he is definitely probably a top dollar donor to these programs that create what is it called? They create dissension. They create chaos. That's right.
Chaos.
And so, anyway, that's very interesting. And these kind of things are funneled through, like I said, social media and funneled through college campus. And that's where our kids are learning these things, and they're all becoming incredibly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Steve, we got another one here as our time is slowly trickling away. But this one is fascinating because now we're leaving the college campus and we're going to your workplace.
That's exactly right. Life with Google.
Life with Google. 9 Google employees arrested after 8-hour sit-in protest. 9 employees were arrested for occupying Google's offices in protest of Project Nimbus, an Israeli military contract.
I got this lead from a friend of mine. I speak at a family camp, and he asked me, "Have you heard of Project Nimbus?" And I said, "No." And he forwarded me the information. And Chris, there was a sit-in. Now, how long? You've been going to Israel a long time. I have too. When you get to Tel Aviv, you see these huge, modern offices. Google, Microsoft, Amazon,
Apple.
They're all there. They've been there a long time. And by the way, they're there because of research and development. They're there because outside of the box thinkers live in Israel. I told you, I never got that DNA. I got the Jewish DNA, but I didn't get that kind of DNA.
You got the out of the box thinking.
Ay. So here, they've been there a long time, and they've made these companies in part what they are. And now you've got people in Google saying, you know what? We don't want to, we shouldn't be part of this.
Yeah.
These people, they can't get them out. They're sat in 8 hours.
Yeah.
8 hours.
This is somebody at their job. This is so interesting to me because now there is it's a culture. That's what ends up happening is these college campuses, and I'd say these more progressively minded companies, they produce the culture of giving the people the freedom to feel as though they can do a sit-in. If I ever did a sit-in, in Jim Shower's office, I'm sure he would say,
sayonara.
Sayonara, buddy.
Arrivederci. But look, I handed you something. I underlined. Read what it said. Right at the top of the underline. What did they do? They live?
Oh, wait. I see it. Okay. The Sunnyvale arrest occurred around the same time. Workers at the Sunnyvale office were live streaming their protest on Twitch.
Watch us. Here we work here. I want you to see. Here we are at our jobs. The people who at Google have invested all this money. We're working for them, and we want you to see how horrible they are.
The problem is that these huge companies are kowtowing to. I was going to say cowtailing. Kowtowing.
They might be doing that too.
To these protesters within their own companies. Recently, McDonald's has bought back all of the 200 franchises in Israel because of, I believe, employee pressure about what's going on between Israel and Hamas. And so they go, all right, fine, we'll buy back all of the. What are they going to do with them? How anti-Semitic is, we're buying all of them back from the Jews, okay, who own these things. That to me sounds like the leading up to the Holocaust. You know, they're buying back businesses that are owned by Israelis, which are predominantly Jewish people. So anyway, very interesting.
We are living, Chris, we joke, I joke from time to time. I'd like, before we give the Yiddish word of the day.
Wait a minute, though. I just want to say, you were talking about joking. Jewish people, the reason that there's great comedy coming out of the Jewish culture is because of what we're talking about right now.
There was Jewish humor even in the Holocaust.
And that's where UK sent me this.
I did. That's right.
And I just want to highlight it really quick. This comes from the New York Jewish Week. They write, new stand-up shows aim to revive
in the Borscht Belt.
In the Borscht Belt's Jewish comedy legacy. Can you explain the Borscht Belt? What is that?
The Borscht Belt was in the Catskills. It got all kinds of entertainers. Their beginning. The Jewish people would go to the Catskills, mainly from New York, but other places. They'd spend a week there. They did tennis. They did, the ladies played mahjong. The kids were in the swimming pool and took lessons. It was a week away from the heat of New York in the cool air and lovely summers. And then they had entertainment. We're Jewish people. Where's the entertainment? Who's playing? What's going on? Who's here? And who is that guy?
Who is he? That's right.
All the oldies. I'm talking my parents' time period. They all got their start in the Borscht Belt, and it seems to be reviving, just like mahjong. Remember, my daughter was here talking about mahjong. It's become a thing. When it used to be strictly the Jewish ladies in suburbia, it had my generation, not so interested. Now my daughter's generation, they're all playing.
Amazing. So anyway, just a little to kind of
put it in the show notes.
It's a cherry on top of what's going on. That to just let you know, in the midst of all the chaos that we're talking about, and it could be depressing, that there's this desire to keep laughing.
What's the show? Who's the comedian? Was he funny? Was he really funny? Oh, he was boring. Don't go to that show.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
All right, I just want to remind Chris, Friends of Israel at FOI.org. Our listeners could go to FOI.org. I'd prefer they go to FOIEquip.org, but for bonus, go to FOI.org. And when you go there, you'll find the conferences that we're doing. And we had one of our PUCs, Prophecies Up Close, here in the property, and a Jewish guy went. We mentioned it to our listeners, and he just wrote. He has his own little group that he writes to. He's very concerned about Israel. He's pro-Israel. He's conservative in his politic, and he has a group of people, mostly Jewish, who read what he says. After he went to one of our events, our event, he loved it. He just said, here are Christians who love the Jewish people. So he is writing. He said, the first thing you need to know about Friends of Israel, that it's a venereal, worldwide, expertly run organization.
That's nice.
Check it out at FOI.org. He's telling Jewish people to do this. Its bi-monthly magazine, Israel My Glory, reaches the homes of hundreds of thousands around the world. Its upfront mission statement.
I love it. I love it.
He is telling Friends of Israel, our mission at Friends of Israel, he's quoting is focused. We are a worldwide evangelical ministry proclaiming biblical truth about Israel and the Messiah while bringing physical and spiritual comfort to the Jewish people. This is a Jewish guy. I can't get him to watch the Jew and Gentile podcast.
Why won't he?
I want him to be the 8th person.
Why won't he watch?
I don't know.
Didn't it do the part, though, where he says we're on a first-name basis?
Oh, yeah, I got to find that. I don't know where it is.
While I eat some almonds.
Don't crunch too loud. Oh, where does he say that? I can't. I'll have to do it next week.
I think you mentioned it last time, but definitely we'll talk about it next week again because that is a great review that he gave.
It is a great thing. But, Chris, we're ready.
Yiddish word of the day, everybody.
Right.
Yiddish word of the day.
All right. I don't mean to depress people. But with all this protest, from the river to the sea, where they want to just kill the Jews, the Yiddish word for the day is Toyt.
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 That doesn't sound depressing.
It doesn't sound depressing.
Yeah.
But
Toyt sounds like, could you pass me the Toyt?
Well, if we combine the English with the Yiddish, the proclamation of these protesters would be Toyt to the Jews. Death to the Jews.
Yeah. Yes.
Death is our Yiddish word for the day, unfortunately. But the good news, and there always is good news, Jesus Christ overcame death. And when we trust in him and him alone, we go from death to life.
Preach.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. From Toyt to L'chaim.
Toyt to L'chaim.
Preach it, brother. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of the Jew and Gentile podcast. We're signing off here, but that doesn't mean we're signing off for good. Number one.
Crunching. No crunching.
Don't worry. I'm not crunching. But you can go to foiequip.org, and there you can sign up for Steve's class, his last class tonight on Romans 9 through 11. If you don't get a chance to catch it, that's fine. You can go online on our YouTube page at FOI Equip, and you can watch all the classes that are made available. Also, be sure to sign up for Mike Stollard's next class. It's coming up in May on facts and flaws of covenant theology. There's so much going on that we want to keep you informed about. And you know what? There's plenty of other times in the future for us to do this, all on the Jew and Gentile podcast. And we'll see you next week.